Good afternoon, everyone. Get this here. I'm going to start with some opening remarks. Violence in the West Bank this year is at levels not seen since the Second Intifada. And in recent weeks, an alarming surge in violent acts has driven this unwelcome record even higher. This includes unprecedented levels of violence by Israeli extremist settlers targeting Palestinians and their property, displacing entire communities, as well as violence by Palestinian extremist militants against Israeli civilians. Today, as President Biden recently warned, the United States is taking action to address this escalating violence in the West Bank by implementing a new visa restriction policy under Section 212A3C of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Under this policy, the United States will pursue visa restrictions against individuals involved in or meaningfully contributing to the undermining of peace, security, or stability in the West Bank. This includes acts of violence against persons or property, as well as undue restrictions on civilians' access to essential services and basic necessities. Immediate family members of such persons may also be subject to these restrictions. The department is pursuing initial action against individuals pursuant to this visa restriction policy today. We will designate additional individuals pursuant to this policy in the coming days. We unequivocally condemn attacks by violent Israeli extremists against Palestinians and those by violent Palestinian extremists against Israelis. These acts threaten West Bank stability in the immediate term and take us further away from a future in which Palestinians and Israelis can both live in peace and security in two states. As Secretary Blinken made clear to leaders of the government of Israel last week during his visit to the region, they need to do more to stop extremist violence against Palestinians and hold those responsible for it accountable. We will continue to insist that both Israeli and Palestinian leaders take action to interrupt the increasing levels of violence against civilians. Both Israel and the Palestinian Authority have a responsibility to uphold stability and protect civilians in the West Bank. Such measures are particularly critical at this juncture. Both Israelis and Palestinians deserve a horizon of hope free from violence, intimidation, and threats. The United States will continue to work to bring this vision closer to reality. Matt?
Oh, okay. That's it. On that, are you saying that today, or even already now, since the announcement came out in the last hour, actual bans have been imposed?
We are taking steps to impose.
Well, have they been?
They are happening today. Whether they happened before I came out to this podium or they're happening this afternoon, they're happening today. And we will have more coming in the coming days. We expect ultimately for this action to impact dozens of individuals and potentially their family members.
Okay. And then just to put a fine point on this, you say it will also affect Palestinians who are implicated in violence against Israelis in the West Bank or elsewhere, I presume. But Palestinians are not included under the visa waiver program. So what's the impact?
They can still apply for visas to come to the United States, and
So
under this program would not be eligible for one.
So, right. So what's the impact on an Israeli settler who you implicate in violence in terms of them being able to come to the U.S. under the visa waiver program?
They will not be able to, and I'll explain how it would work. So any Israeli citizen who currently has a visa to enter the United States will be notified that visa has been revoked.
Hold on. Not any Israeli implicated, targeted
in this program. In this program, yes, right. In this program, will be notified that I was speaking about this program. So
okay, all right.
I thought that was evident.
But you know.
Fair enough. No, fair enough. Good to be precise. Will be notified that their visa is revoked. Any other Israeli citizen who is designated as a result of this program but does not currently have a visa will not be notified. If they want to travel to the United States and they apply through ESTA, which is the way that it works if you're currently a visa waiver program country, that application will be rejected. They are then able to go and apply for a visa, and if they have been designated as a result of this program, that visa application would be rejected.
Okay, and does this have broader implications for the Israel's membership in VWP?
No, this is separate from that. Okay,
Thanks.
Jillian.
So the Israeli law enforcement officials now claim that they have more than 1,500 pieces of evidence that Hamas committed sexual abuse, sexual atrocities on October 7th. Are you aware of any evidence or claims that Hamas sexually abused any American citizens on or since that day?
So I'm not going to speak to any evidence that we have about the status of people who have been held hostage. That goes back to our longstanding policy of not talking about the status of hostages and what we know about their whereabouts. We've never thought it's productive to our work to try to bring them home to do so. I will say I'm not aware of reports with respect to American citizens on October 7th. They may exist, but I'm not aware of them here. But certainly we have seen the evidence that the atrocities that Hamas committed on October 7th included sexual assault. If you looked at the presentation that was made at the United Nations yesterday, it was shocking, horrific. We hope that it opens the world's eyes to what happened on October 7th, because there was incredibly compelling first-hand accounts from eyewitnesses and first responders and physicians about Hamas's sexual violence against women and girls on that day.
Does the U.S. have any reason to think it possible that Hamas could have continued or at any time sexually abused hostages in its custody, whether they're American or not?
I am just not going to speak to what we know about the status of hostages inside Gaza. As I said, we've never thought that's productive to our efforts to bring them home.
Yesterday, you told us that the Biden administration supports the Israeli ongoing investigation into this. Can you share any more detail or clarity about, like, does the U.S. support that effort in spirit, or are you sort of materially helping in the investigation?
We support their investigation. If they asked us for any substantive support, I'm sure that we would, of course, be willing and open and ready to assist. I don't know that that request will come in. These are all events that happened inside Israel. So when you think about how you conduct that type of a criminal investigation, it's people who are on the ground that would conduct it. And of course, Israel has full capacity to do so. But of course, if they ask for our assistance, we would be ready to assist in any way that was useful.
Last question. The parents of Evangerscovich told our channel this morning that the president promised them to do whatever it takes to bring him home, and they are, I can send you the verbatim, but they are essentially disappointed at this point because it appears the administration has not done so. Can you share anything about state's efforts?
I will say I saw that interview, and what his family is going through is unimaginable. I don't think any of us who have children, it's hard to imagine your child being held, as Evan has been for months now. Should have been released a long time ago. We have made multiple proposals for his release, as well as for the release of Paul Whelan. We are constantly discussing this issue with our allies and our partners who can assist us. Not a week goes by without intense activity to bring Paul and Evan home. And I will say that in recent weeks, we made a new and significant proposal to secure Paul and Evan's release. That proposal was rejected by Russia. Shouldn't have to make these proposals. They never should have been arrested in the first place. They should both be released immediately. But we have made a number of proposals, and including a substantial one in recent weeks, and we will continue to work every day to bring Evangerscovich and Paul Whelan home. There is no higher priority for the Secretary of State. There is no higher priority for the President. Yeah.
On that, can you give us any more details on what the proposal entails?
I can't. It was we have made a number of proposals now to secure both of their release. We've been public about having done so, and we have always declined to release the details. But this was a new proposal in recent weeks. It was a significant proposal, and it was rejected by the Russians. But it will not deter us from continuing to do everything we can to try and bring both of them home.
At what level was that proposal?
I'm just not going to get in.
Is it the same channel you guys have been using?
We have pressed the importance of this case through a number of channels with the Russian government. I'm not going to get into the details of how we communicate with them, but we have ways to communicate with them. We have ways to make offers known to them, and we will continue to do so, and we hope that we will be able to secure their release.
Has there been any communication between the Secretary and Lavrov since their last encounter back?
There has not. There has not.
Just
on
this
this,
proposal.
on this,
I'll come to you next.
this new proposal in recent weeks, was it just for Evan, or did it also include Paul Whelan?
It was for both of them.
It was for both of them, and
Yeah,
can you
it
at all?
was to bring both of them home. We have made clear all along that we do not want to leave either one of them behind. We want to bring both Evan and Paul home.
Right, and when you say the Russians have rejected that, do you mean they have rejected to engage with the United States on this, or they have taken the proposal, looked at it for a couple of days, and then came back and said, this is not acceptable?
I'm not going to get into the full details of our exchanges with the Russian government, but they received the proposal. We know that let me just say, they rejected it. This was not a case of them not having responded to us. They
Right.
they rejected the offer that was on the table.
Were you able to engage with them on this directly, or was there
I'm just not
a
going
party
to get,
intermediary?
I'm not going to get into any further details.
Those
Leon, did you
were
have
exactly my questions.
Okay, okay.
Follow up on the proposal.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did the proposal contain anything about al-Suquma?
I'm not going to, this was a proposal that related to Paul and Evan, two American citizens who we have determined to be wrongfully detained. It was not for other detainees, and I'm not going to talk to
But
others.
some of us had a chance last week to meet with Al-Su's family. Her husband was in town. But what he told us was that her captives had been telling Al-Su in jail that the United States does not care about her case. They are not doing anything, in fact, on behalf of her. Can you suggest anything new, anything that we have talked in this room before that would suggest otherwise?
So first, we very much care about her case. We care about her. We care about the safety and security of every American overseas. We are following the case closely. We remain deeply concerned about the extension of her pretrial detention. We take seriously our commitment to assist U.S. citizens who have been detained overseas, and we will continue to do so. We have not made, at this point, any further determinations with respect to that case.
Can you please come back to more different topic?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
one-
Go, just,
One more thing on this. When you say proposal, Matt, you mean the United States has offered to release or, commute the sentence of two people in the United States, jailed Russians, in exchange for...
I appreciate the attempt. When I say a proposal, I mean that we made a proposal, and I'm just not, I understand the
I
question.
mean,
I'm
can we
not- I'm just
say
not,
proposal for a hostage swap?
I'm just not going to get into any further details. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you can tell us, but are Evangerscovich is aware about this proposal?
I am not going to speak. I'm not going to speak to our conversations with the family members. We always keep those confidential. But they're certainly welcome to. But we never talk about them, other than to say that we remain in touch with Evangerscovich's family. We remain in touch with Paul Whelan's family, but we don't talk about the details of those engagements publicly.
Just a quick follow-up on the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty journalist, also Karmashov. You were asked yesterday, so Evan was determined as wrongfully detained less than 2 weeks after he was arrested or detained by Russia. But then Al-Su was arrested or detained in October, and it's been more than 6 weeks. What is the reason that she has not been determined by the State Department as wrongfully detained?
So every case is different. The facts and circumstances are very clear that we're able to look at it. And remember, we are not just looking at an individual case. When we look at that case, we're looking at, among other things, how that individual is being treated in comparison to other individuals charged with the same crimes, for example. So we always are looking at very fact-specific determinations, and that you cannot take one case with one fact set and compare it to another case with a different fact set and say that it means that you can come to the same conclusion in the same amount of time. What we try to do is gather all the information that is available to us, to look at that information, to compare it to different cases, look at a number of pieces of information oftentimes that aren't known to the public, that are known to the United States government, and make our determinations. As I have said with respect to this case, and as I've said with respect to other cases, the fact that a wrongful detention determination has not been made at any specific moment in time is not necessarily an indication that one will not be made in the future. We are constantly looking at these cases and making our best assessments as we can based on the facts, based on the law.
Has the secretary got the chance to reply to the letter from the U.S. Congress?
We just got it yesterday. I'm sure we've not sent a response yet. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to go back to these sanctions, visa sanctions, there's been an uptick in violence in the West Bank, significantly so in the past few months leading up to this war. Granted, there's been settler violence for years in the West Bank. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time the U.S. is sanctioning extremist settlers in many years.
You're not wrong.
Was there a determining factor as to why now? Why is this only just happening, given that there was a significant surge in violence in the months leading up to this war? Why is the U.S. only doing this now?
So there was a surge in violence leading up to October 7th. There has been a significant increase from that already heightened level of violence since October 7th. And I will answer it by talking about the first thing that we have done, which is to impress upon the government of Israel the conclusion of the United States that they need to do more to take action to stop extremist settler violence and to hold accountable extremist settlers who commit acts of violence. We have raised that in a number of conversations with the government of Israel. The White House has made public that the president has raised that directly with Prime Minister Netanyahu in their conversations. The secretary has raised it as recently as last Thursday when we were in Israel. And in all those conversations, we made clear that while we expected the government of Israel to take action, the United States was ready and willing to take our own action if we didn't see them take actions of their own. So we have not seen a sufficient level of actions by the government of Israel that we think hold people properly accountable. They have taken some steps. They've held some people. They've put some people in administrative detention. We have made clear we think that when the facts support it, people should be prosecuted if they've committed acts of violence. And so we've taken the actions that we, the United States government, can take. That does not obviate the need for the government of Israel to take its own actions, and we will continue to be clear with them about it.
And just one follow-up, and this, again, maybe an old figure, but some 15% worth of Israeli settlers have American citizenship. I know you've been asked about this before. Is there going to be a way to hold American Israelis to account who may have committed violence? I have a feeling you're going to say state doesn't comment on this. Who do we need to ask about this? What is the process for
Yeah,
that?
a few things. So number one, with respect to the policy that we announced today, we cannot issue visa bans to American citizens. Obviously, they don't need visas to enter the United States. Number two, it is the government of Israel that has the responsibility to hold extremist settlers responsible. That includes settlers of any nationality who are committing violent acts of against Palestinians. Number three, I've been asked sometimes whether we would take our own law enforcement actions. Obviously, we don't speak to this from the State Department. It's a question for the Department of Justice, and you shouldn't interpret my declining to comment on that as any sign of activity, other than that I would never comment on law enforcement actions from this podium.
Thank you.
Thank you. On the settlers' violence, will Bing Gair be on this list? Do we expect like you will name leaders of the settlers movement?
We are prohibited by law from publicly naming anyone who is designated for a visa restriction as a result of this policy.
Okay. I have like three quick follow-up on something that you said yesterday. You said yesterday that you assume that Hamas does not want to release these women for fear that they're going to talk about sexual violence or rape. So if we follow this logic, that means Hamas will never release them because they never want the story to be told. Is this something we can go through?
So I hope Hamas will release all of the hostages they are holding, especially the women and girls that they continue to hold. So they have released some hostages. There are others that they continue to hold, including women and girls. They had made clear that during the pause they would release them. They changed their mind. I hope they will change it again and let them go free.
Okay, and also you said yesterday that Hamas has weapons in churches. Is this an evidence you talk about, or you just like when you talk about hospitals and schools and you lumped up churches?
I think I said mosques.
You said churches.
I meant to say mosques. Speaking of Gaza, so there is ample public evidence, not supplied by the U.S. government, but ample public evidence
Just
of them
want to
having
hear the
fought,
churches.
of them having concealed weapons and hid their terrorist infrastructure and launched terrorist attacks from inside mosques inside Gaza.
And finally, you said genocide, that you have a clear definition of what is genocide.
I assume there is no politics involved. It's just a clear-cut understanding of what is a definition according to international law. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay, so why it took the U.S. decades to declare the Armenian genocide? Was not politics involved in here?
I will not speak to determinations that happened well before my time here at the podium.
No, but I meant like politics can be involved.
I understand. I can tell you that we don't take politics into our determinations that we make here.
Okay, so this administration doesn't, but the previous.
I did not say that. Those are your words, not mine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I have two questions. One is on the counterterrorism report for 2022 on Bangladesh suggested that the government with assistance from the USA have been actively combating militant, leading to a decrease in terrorist incident in Bangladesh. However, the concern raised that the political violence prior to the general election is perceived as a potential risk for the resurgence of militant groups. What is your opinion? Can you suggest any plan to assist BD government in this point?
So we have made clear that we want to see a free and fair and peaceful election in Bangladesh. And that continues to be our policy. That continues to be the focus of our engagement with the Bangladeshi government.
It was not. It was about terror. The rise of terrorism, maybe, not about the election.
I understand. We released a report yesterday, or in the last few days, and I don't have any further comment than what's contained in that report. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Thank you, Matthew.
We're trying to move around. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matthew. A few questions. One, what's the State Department's view on the current outbreak that's affecting Chinese children? Will the State Department support Republicans' call for a travel ban on China?
So we will continue to monitor the situation closely and provide important updates should the situation changes. I would say for now, I would refer you to the CDC for any updates on respiratory illnesses in the PRC. As this point, the CDC has said publicly it does not have any evidence that it's a novel pathogen.
And reportedly, Republican senators are struggling to reach an agreement with Democrats on funding for border security, which is a contingency for the GOP in Congress to support further funding for Ukraine. Is the department worried that funding for Ukraine won't be allocated by the end of the year, as it is set to run out according to OMB?
So we have made very clear at every level of this administration that Congress needs to act to fund security assistance to Ukraine, to fund economic assistance to Ukraine, to fund not just security assistance to Israel, but humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, which we have been providing and we want to provide more. We are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to our ability to provide security assistance to Ukraine. Ukraine is about to enter what we know will be a very difficult winter, when we've seen Russia launch attacks on critical Ukrainian infrastructure that they use to enable people to heat their homes during the winter. So it is our position in this administration that we need to stand by our partner at this difficult time. We need to continue to support them in their fight against Russia, and we hope that the U.S. Congress will be there as well.
And lastly, is there any evidence that U.S. funding of UNRWA contributed to the October 7 attacks by Hamas?
No, there is not at all. Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. The topic of Ukraine. Can you please confirm the report the Secretary will appear on the Hill today to brief the members on the aid to Ukraine?
So the Secretary is on the Hill today. He met, or I think he's either meeting right now or just concluded a meeting with members of the House of Representatives. After that, has a meeting with all senators. It's the Secretary as well as other members of the Cabinet who are up making the case for why this supplemental is so critical, not just for the future of Ukraine, but for the United States' interests as well. As we have always made clear, it is a critical national security interest of the United States to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia's aggression. So the Secretary is up making that case. We will continue to make that case in the coming days. We have just a few weeks until the end of the year, and we hope that Congress will act as quickly as possible.
Thanks so much. Moving to Azerbaijan, if I may.
Yeah.
Following yesterday's announcement of Assistant Secretary's trip to Azerbaijan, he showed up, on the Hill 3 weeks ago, and he made a case that there will be, new business as usual, not let's say business as usual with Azerbaijan, as long as they don't, let's say, solve the Karabakh conflict. The fact that he is headed to Azerbaijan, is this a departure from newly announced policy?
No, not at all. We never said that we're not going to continue to engage with Azerbaijan. That would be against our interests as the United States of America. We think it would be against the interests of peace and security in the region for us to just drop all of our diplomatic engagements with Azerbaijan. We continue to engage directly with both Azerbaijan and Armenia to make clear, for example, in the case of Azerbaijan, where we have concerns, we've been concerned with the recent trend of detaining journalists. We continue to urge them to respect the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all. It's something that I've spoken to from this podium in the past. And we also continue to engage with them to urge them to seek a durable peace with Armenia. And that's something that will continue to be the focus of our diplomatic engagements.
Will the Secretary raise the case, ongoing clampdown against independent reporters during his visit in Azerbaijan?
I do not want to preview the comments. He's there. I think he's getting there tonight. He has meetings tomorrow. I should not preview private diplomatic conversations before they've happened. But I will say that human rights is always on the table for the United States of America when we have these sorts of diplomatic engagements.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Becky. I wanted to ask first about Ukraine, just following up on that. Has the US given any assurances to Zelensky that funding will continue, or it can give any kind of support if the supplemental doesn't pass?
So one of the things about the Ukrainian government is they are very sophisticated observers of the U.S. political system. Now, almost 2 years into this war, we've been engaging with them. They have their own engagements with Congress. I don't think there's any question about the executive branch's support for Ukraine. We don't think there's any question about the legislative branch's support for Ukraine. If you put funding for Ukraine in an up or down vote in front of both houses of Congress, it is our belief that it would pass. So President Zelensky has engaged directly with members of the Senate and members of the House of Representatives. I think they can make their own assessments about where things stand in Congress. But I will say it is critical that Congress act. We cannot continue to fund Ukraine security assistance without additional support from Congress. There's just statutory limitations. We are at the end of our drawdown authority. We've exhausted over 97% of what was allocated. We only have a very small amount left, and we will exhaust those packages in the coming weeks. And so we very much need Congress to act, and we need them to act as soon as possible.
And just lastly, on the vessel attacks over the weekend in the Red Sea, Jake yesterday said that they were looking at forming some kind of international task force that could help protect ships as they make their way through the Red Sea. I just wanted to know if there's been any movement on that and which countries have been approached to help on that kind of...
Well, I don't have any new updates to announce since 24 hours ago. It's something that we continue to engage in with our allies and partners. And I think the point that the National Security Advisor was making is that this is not, the Houthis' attacks on international shipping is not just a concern, should not just be a concern to countries in the region. It should be a concern to every country in the world because it threatens the global economy. There are ships that come through that area that carry goods destined for the entire world. And so we will work with our allies and partners to try to develop a coordinated response to these increase in Houthi attacks.
Does that include Arab partners as well as Western partners?
We would welcome support from anyone in this effort.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I have two questions, please. U.S. Defense Secretary said that Israel will only win in Gaza if civilians are protected. In fact, the most who killed are civilians, children, and women. So that means Israel is losing, and when this war will end?
I do not think I would draw that conclusion from what the Secretary of Defense said. The Secretary of Defense was making a similar, but I think fairly pointed point, similar point to what others in the administration have made. You have heard the Secretary say that far too many civilians have been killed in Gaza. You have heard the Secretary say that, Secretary Blinken, that Israel needs to do more to minimize civilian harm and protect civilians from harm. That was the focus of our trip to Israel last week, and I think I shouldn't speak to what the Secretary of Defense says because there's another spokesperson across the river who does that, but I think he was making the larger point that the way Israel conducts this war matters, and I will let his spokesperson elaborate on that further. And with respect to the prediction, I just can't make that prediction.
Today or yesterday late today, I talked with my cousin. He in Gaza. He lives in Gaza. He's not related to Hamas. He told me we are hungry. We don't have food, no water for my children, for my grandchildren. He told me everything is targeting human, unhuman, green He told me this is, you talk about future in Gaza, they will remove Gaza from the map. What are you talking about?
So-
please consider for a while, or think, if you are if you put yourself on their place, what do you think? What you are going to do?
So first of all, let me just say I'm sorry to hear that account. I know it's a family member. That is extraordinarily difficult, and I'm sorry to hear it. I will say that what the United States is doing to address that very situation is, number one, making clear to Israel that we do not want to see this campaign conducted in the South the way it has been conducted in the North. We are 4 or 5 days into this campaign in the South. It's just started again after the pause. It's too early to make, I think, overall assessments about how it's going, but certainly I know for civilians on the ground, conditions are incredibly difficult. We are engaging with the government of Israel at every level to try to increase the amount of humanitarian assistance that is getting in, so people do have food and people do have water. We are working with UNRWA to try to identify sites where civilians can go to be safe from harm, and working with the government of Israel to ensure that those sites are protected and are not targeted. There is not enough being done right now. The level of assistance that's getting in is not sufficient. It needs to go up, and we've made that clear to the government of Israel. The level of fuel that is going in is not sufficient. It needs to go up, and we have made that clear to the government of Israel. And we will continue to engage with them on every level, precisely to try and address the very real human suffering that your family member is going through, and we know so many civilians in Gaza are going through.
And when this war will end, please? This tragic war.
There is no way that I can stand here and make that type of a prediction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go.
Please, please.
Yeah.
Quickly, similar to staying on the south of Gaza, the Wall Street Journal had a report on Israel sharing plans with the US about possibly flooding the Hamas tunnels with seawater. There's concern about the environmental impact that would have, as well as on the structure of buildings above the tunnels, which is, as you know, a vast network. Do you have any comment on that?
So I'm just not going to comment on reports of actions that the Israeli government may or may not take. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to do so. I will just say that in all of our conversations with them, we urge them to take into account humanitarian needs, humanitarian imperatives in making all of these types of decisions.
Can I follow up what you just said? You said there's not enough being done right now in terms of humanitarian aid and fuel into Gaza. You mean that Israeli government is not doing enough?
There is not enough fuel, there's not enough food, there's not enough water getting in. The number of trucks currently getting in, around 100 a day, I think it was 100 yesterday, is lower than it was during the pause. It needs to be higher.
Right,
and we are engaging with the Israeli government to encourage them to allow more trucks to get in.
Okay, so it's the onus is on the Israeli
Correct.
government.
Correct.
Right. And in terms of going back to the civilians question, Secretary Blinken was there, we were with him, and he made it very clear he doesn't want the southern Gaza offensive to look like northern Gaza, and you're saying it's too early, but when do you think it won't be too early to make an assessment? How long the U.S. is going to wait to make that assessment?
I just don't think I can speak to that with any level of specificity. I will say that we have seen them conducting the campaign in some ways in the South in a different fashion than they did in the North. I just talked yesterday about how they are publishing more limited evacuation zones where there are Hamas fighters embedded in civilian infrastructure, and they are identifying specific geographic areas inside cities rather than say all of Khan Yunis evacuate. They're identifying specific areas where they know there are Hamas fighters embedded, and they want to be able to take a legitimate fight to those Hamas fighters, and they are asking people appropriately to evacuate from those areas. That is a difference from the North than what happened, or it's a difference from what happened in the North in their campaign there when they asked the entire city. But let me just finish. That said, the point that the secretary made to them and the point he made public, or that he said publicly, is it's not just intent that matters, it's results. I very much get your question. I think 4 days into this campaign is a little too early to draw any definitive conclusions about results. But we will continue to monitor what's happening, and we will continue to press them to do everything they can to minimize civilian harm. And when we have differences with how they are conducting their campaign, we will make that known to them, as we have since the beginning of this conflict.
Right. But I mean, do you have any expectation that in the coming days they're going to shift to different tactics? Do you have any anticipation that they're going to use airstrikes less and more surgical ground offensives, that you think in its entirety it's going to look different and there will be a smaller, or like a reduction in the death toll? I'm just trying to understand why you guys are waiting.
I would say I don't think it is appropriate for me to comment on what the military campaign might look like in terms of airstrikes versus a ground operation. It's an ongoing conflict. Those are obviously sensitive decisions that the Israeli government has to make. I shouldn't talk about them from here. What we will talk to them about are how they conduct those operations, and we'll continue to do so.
Matt, can I just ask
Yeah, go ahead.
You said it's too early to make a definitive decision on, but what about an interim decision? I mean, surely you've seen enough in the last 4 days to, come to a conclusion about whether the Israelis are following through on what they committed to you, not just on the intent, but also on the result. And I'm not asking for a final grade here, and not even maybe a midterm grade, but it's been going on for several days.
So
and surely you're in a position to be able to judge whether what you have seen so far you think meets their commitments.
So let me try to divide these into two things. With respect to airstrikes, I'm not in a position to assess strikes and individual strikes that have happened over the last few days. We've talked about this before. It's very tough to do that from here when you don't know the targets that were the Hamas militants that were the targets of any individual strike. You don't know with any individual strike the collateral damage. It's very tough to make those determinations from here. I will say, with respect to other aspects of how they conduct the campaign, you have seen them take the steps I just outlined that are an improvement from what they did in the north. That said, you see the reports from UNRWA and from other UN agencies that the places where civilians are going are overcrowded. They need more humanitarian assistance. They need more food and water. And in that respect, we don't think Israel is doing enough. We think they need to do more to allow humanitarian assistance in. That's why I said we want the number of trucks to increase. 100 a day is not enough. 70,000 liters of fuel going in a day is not enough for the humanitarian needs. And so we want to see improvement on both of those points.
Okay, so on both of those points.
Humanitarian assistance, the trucks, fuel. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Trucks are inclusive of food, water,
right,
medicine.
But that's
Yeah.
one point. So, but you're okay. But
Yeah.
you're able to make a judgment that you don't think that they're doing enough on that side. But when you talk about the airstrikes, you say you're not ready to make a determination, and yet the entire message that the Secretary and the Vice President gave to the Israelis over the last week and over the weekend was that we do not want to see a repeat of what happened in the north and the south. And a repeat of what happened in the north would be airstrikes.
A few things. Number one, it has never been our policy that Israel should not conduct airstrikes.
I'm not saying it-
I know.
I'm
I'm just making that clear. There are legitimate military targets, including high-value targets that they have a right to go after, because those Hamas fighters have said they will continue to launch individual attacks. I'm not able to comment on specific strikes. It's hard to assess from here.
I don't think anyone is that.
I know. But this, let me finish.
On target
I know,
X or target
but
Y.
let me finish my answer. I can talk to you about trucks and fuel because we have very clear metrics about what the people in Gaza need. We know how much fuel they need to be able to power desalination, and the amount that's going in now is not enough. We know how much water they need. It's not enough.
And you have no metrics on airstrikes.
I'm telling you
or the amount of damage.
So there are two ways to look at that question. One is assessing a specific strike, and I just got into that, why we couldn't do it there. Two is looking at the totality of a campaign and how it's conducted. And 4 days into this one, I think it's a little premature to draw any conclusions. But as I said, or as I said, as the secretary said, we're going to be watching this very closely, and we will not
Well, I
hesitate.
mean, if you're watching it very
and-
closely,
and
surely
we-
you come to conclusion about, what you think in the early days, in the first 4 days, or you're.
I have just outlined some of our conclusions about it. Other things we need more time to watch, but we will be very clear about what we see with the Israeli government and where we think they need to make improvements.
All right.
Just to follow up
Yeah.
on this, on these safe zones or whatever you call it. I mean, you mentioned yourself, UNRWA, and they're saying that it's actually creating even more of a problem in terms of humanitarian assistance because they're coming into these tiny or very narrow places. So it's actually, in a sense, you made a big deal out of this, but it's actually, in a sense, making things worse. And you're displacing, the war is displacing, again, all these people, which have to go. So what is your comment on that?
There is just a very difficult problem to solve here. And it all goes back to the fact that Hamas continues to hide behind civilians in civilian neighborhoods, under apartment buildings, under schools and hospitals and mosques. And so, yes, the places where, I mean, this is just the nature of the problem, in that Israel has a right to conduct military campaigns to prevent October 7th from ever happening again, and to try to take out the leaders who plotted October 7th and want to do it again. They're all hiding they're all hiding behind civilians. So the choice is, don't displace some level of people and just attack civilian sites without asking the civilians to leave. That's obviously unacceptable. Versus trying to get them to move so you can carry out what is a legitimate military campaign. What we've said is we don't want to see mass displacement on the scale that happened in the north. There has to be some level of temporary displacement, or you're going to see even higher civilian deaths. And so what we want to see is that carried out in as humane a fashion as possible, and that does mean trying to get more humanitarian assistance into those sites. But it is absolutely a terrible problem that is very difficult to solve, and we're working to try to address it the best we can. But we are in the middle of a war here with Israel facing an opponent really unlike any other. I mean, if you think about other conventional wars, the army is not typically hiding all of its troops underneath civilians. Yeah, Michelle.
Did the U.S. ask Egypt to open Rafah crossing for the Palestinian civilians who want to flee?
So we are not. Let me say a few. That's a complicated question. There are a number of Palestinian civilians who have left via Rafah. Those who are wounded have been, in a number of cases, have been evacuated so they can seek medical assistance outside of Gaza. But the thing that we have heard from Palestinian leaders and from others in the region is that they don't want to see the Palestinian people leave their land. They don't want to see the Palestinian people displaced. There is obviously a well-known history in this regard, and that is the policy of the United States, is that the Palestinian people should not be displaced. So that's why we're trying to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
And second, does the administration still believe or think that Iran doesn't want to expand the war in the Middle East?
So you have not heard me make that assessment from here. What we have said is we are sending every signal we can to Iran that they should not want this conflict to be expanded. We have made very clear it is not in anyone's interest in the region for this conflict to be expanded. The United States certainly doesn't want it to be expanded, but at the same time, we will take the measures that are necessary to protect our personnel in the region and our interests in the region.
Thank you.
Are you aware of any Americans who are among the 16,000 who have been killed in Gaza?
No, we again have this one person that we've had reports of a death of an American citizen for several weeks now in northern Gaza, and because of the situation there have not been able to verify that report, and we've not received reports of any additional Americans other than that one that we have not yet confirmed.
And do you have any information on how this person was reportedly killed?
We have some information, but I'm hesitant to speak to it from here, given it's unconfirmed information. The entire thing may not be accurate, so I'd like to confirm it. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So we have seen your comments yesterday regarding India's failed assassination attempt on Khalistani Sikh leader Gurpatwant Singh Pannu in New York. and you directed journalists to the DOJ. But what is happening at the diplomatic level? What kind of message State Department conveyed to the Indian leadership?
So I also spoke to this yesterday, and I said I wouldn't comment on the underlying substance because it is an ongoing law enforcement matter, and it would be inappropriate for me to do so when DOJ is presenting a case in court. But I also made clear that we have noted at the most senior levels of this government, the Secretary of State has raised this directly with his foreign counterpart, that we take this issue very seriously. They told us they would conduct an investigation. They have publicly announced an investigation, and now we'll wait to see the results of the investigation, but it's something we take very seriously.
So the Indian government is still not cooperating with the Canadian investigation into the murder of another Khalistani leader, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So how confident and optimistic you are that Indian government will cooperate with the DOJ?
So two things. One, we have urged them to cooperate with the Canadian investigation. And number two, with respect to their own investigations, I was speaking to, not the DOJ investigation. With their own investigation, they have said that they will conduct it. We are looking forward to seeing the results of that investigation, and I'm not going to make any assessments, obviously, before the investigation itself is completed.
So do you think this is an attack on the U.S. sovereignty?
What is it, attack on what?
U.S. sovereignty.
I'm not going to speak beyond what the information that's contained in an indictment for what I think are fairly obvious reasons. Go ahead.
Matthew, good afternoon. The American hostages held by Hamas, does the U.S. believe that they're all alive?
Again, I'm just not able to make any. I'm not going to make any assessments about what we know or don't know about the hostages.
If there's no ceasefire, can they still be rescued?
Again, we are working every day to try and return hostages. In the last pause, you saw over 100 hostages released, including 2 American citizens. We had previously secured the release of 2 other American citizens over a month ago. And we will continue, whether there is a pause or not, we will continue to work to try and secure the release of all those American citizens.
And one more on the Philippines, if I may take you to the, okay. So the other day, a couple days ago, a Catholic mass, terrorists targeted a Catholic mass, bombing it, killing and wounding dozens of worshipers there. The Islamic State claimed responsibility. I know the State Department forcefully condemned the attack in a statement, but I'd just like to know, what's the State Department's message directly to the terrorists who blew up that mass?
Well, we strongly condemn that attack. We condemn any terrorist attack. We condemn any attacks at all targeting religious organizations, targeting churches, or whether it be mosques or schools. The United States always takes that position, and we do so here. All right, we'll do one more, and then we'll wrap up for today. Go ahead.
It's been reported that members of Congress reviewed the plan to facilitate the displacement of Gazans, so to settle in several Mid-Eastern countries like Turkey, Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan. Have you heard about this report, and what's your comment?
I haven't. There are 535 members of Congress. I don't speak for any of them. I will make clear what the position of the United States is, which the Secretary has made clear, which is that we oppose any forced displacement of the Palestinian people. And with that, we'll wrap for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks.